Okay, with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Andy Green. Andy joined Johns Hopkins in October 2019, and he works with JHU leadership to guide the university's public voice and messaging, provides counsel to senior leadership to advance strategic priorities, and leads the team charged with telling the stories of the university's students, faculty, and staff. A veteran reporter and editor who spent nearly 2 decades at the Baltimore Sun, Green has written extensively about Baltimore, Maryland, and contemporary issues, and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in editorial writing in 2016. Andy, it's your show.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. I'll just do a quick presentation at the start and then we can get into the questions, which is always the most interesting part. Just wanted to give kind of a brief overview of what it is I do exactly, which was good for me to put in a presentation so I could try to figure out for myself what it is I do. As you heard, I'm relatively new to this position, and so it's been a really interesting opportunity to learn a lot of things and to grow myself over the last year and a half as I've been moving into this new role. So what does a vice president for communications do? So a lot of different things. So I'm responsible for helping to enhance the reputation of Johns Hopkins globally, nationally, and locally to try to get people to understand or to know about all the good work that's being done here in kind of advancing knowledge and serving our community. Establishing and protecting clear standards for the Johns Hopkins brand. So, a lot of, particularly now, as you may know, Johns Hopkins has been a really leading voice really around the world on the COVID pandemic. And so a lot of people or companies kind of want to associate with us kind of for their own benefit. And so we have to be very careful to make sure that, that's not happening so that it doesn't look like there are, conflicts of interest or people kind of trying to glom onto us who shouldn't be. Promoting Johns Hopkins research and innovation. So as I said before, helping people to know about some of the really incredible things that are going on, whether it's in medical research or public health around trying to help people work through the pandemic, or some of the really cool stuff that's going on at the Applied Physics Lab where they're sending drone copters to moons of Saturn and stuff like that. So we help people know all the great stuff that's going on here. We manage real and potential public relations issues. So we're a really big institution with tens of thousands of students, faculty, and staff. And so from time to time we face kind of controversies locally or nationally that we need to work through to try to help tell our story in the best way possible. As I said before, there are a lot of people in this institution, and so spend a lot of time helping keep them informed about what's going on here. That's been really important during the last year as we've had to adapt to the pandemic, dating, almost exactly a year ago now when, the university had to make the decision to basically send everybody home. All the students got sent home, all the faculty had to go home, all the staff had to learn to work from home. And so, there have been a lot of, new situations and developments over the course of the last year that we've had to keep people informed about, and new rules to follow when you are on campus, masking and distancing and what you can do in a dorm and what you can't do, and how the dining halls are going to work and all that sort of stuff, all the million different things that go on here. We've had to adapt and have had to communicate to people about what's going on and how they can be best informed about that. So how do you do all those sorts of things? So I have a really great team of people I work with within my staff and throughout the university who help in a whole bunch of different ways. So we've got people in our office with a wide variety of skill sets and areas of focus. So, in the world of communications, there are a lot of different things you can do depending on what you're interested in and what you're good at. So we've got media relations. So those are the people who help make sure that stories about our research or about important things at the institution are picked up in the press, and so the public gets to learn about it that way. We do a lot of social media on our own. So we have, there are people within my office who are in charge of all the kind of main Johns Hopkins accounts on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. And so they use that to help communicate to audiences around the world and within the institution. We do a lot with live events planning and production, and particularly these days, setting up seminars and things like that in the virtual space is kind of a big thing that we've been doing recently. We've done some of that before, but now obviously it's a really big deal. Video, so we do all kinds of video related to university initiatives, or when a Johns Hopkins researcher won the Nobel Prize last year, we sent a video crew with him to the award ceremony in Sweden, and they produced this really great video of kind of his journey there and what that experience was like. Or we do a lot of video to help explain some of the research that's going on here that it might be kind of hard to understand otherwise, and so we do a lot with that. Photography, so we've got photographers on staff who go around and kind of chronicle life day to day at the university, and they also provide photos for Hopkins Magazine. They provide photos for our web kind of news outlets and things like that too, and then also just sort of generally create archives for what's been happening at the university from year to year. Web design and production, there are like jillions of Johns Hopkins websites out there for different departments, different schools, different research centers, and different initiatives. And so we play a central role in helping, keep them all kind of cohesive, and so that they have, the same kind of professional look to them, and help people when they need new websites to stand those up. So we have people who do the design, we have people who do the coding, graphic design. We have people who, make all kinds of print materials, who help us with the Hopkins Magazine, who, these days they're doing all kinds of signs related to COVID safety stuff, like, reminding people to wear masks and to stand 6 feet apart and all that sort of thing. So they've been really busy with that over the last several months. And then we have news and information. So, as I've mentioned, we've got a magazine that comes out 4 times a year. And then we have our own kind of internal news website called The Hub, where we have a staff of reporters and editors who write news stories about what's going on at the university. And then internal communications, that's, helping to write messages that go to, literally thousands of people to help keep them informed about what's going on where they study or work. And then strategic communications and issues management. So that's, like I said, when we have potential like public relations issues or controversies that we might be involved in, helping to navigate through that sort of stuff. So here's some examples. So like media relations, you may have seen this. This is the COVID dashboard. This is a map that got really famous kind of around the world. It was launched by a young professor in our engineering school, right back last January, right when the pandemic was starting. We sent out press releases about this, and next thing you know, it got picked up on CNN and NPR, New York Times, like all over the place. People really came to rely on this as the definitive source of information about where COVID cases were spreading. Social media, so we've got, as I said, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of stuff. And so it's, that's kind of a mix of, serious things, letting people know about research or about new developments at the university. And then also there's kind of fun and cute stuff here, like these were some COVID Valentines that the team put together last week, just kind of for a fun thing. Live events, like I said, we were doing a lot of virtual stuff. So this was an event that we did last fall in conjunction with the University of Washington, which is another big leader in COVID research. And so we had kind of our experts and their experts get together, along with, like Anthony Fauci was involved in this, and other kind of big name folks at the CDC and in the government who are helping, and the NIH to work on the vaccine rollout. And so this was an important time when people were really worried about political influence in the process. And so, we were able to play a role there in helping explain to people what was going on and what needed to happen in order for the vaccine to be developed and distributed safely. Video, so what kinds of things we did recently.
Students, faculty, or staff, the JHU Social Compact is a way to keep all of us safe. You can read the whole thing by going here. As a community, we are committed to keeping an eye on our own health, reporting symptoms, covering our faces, indoors, outdoors, wherever we can, keeping our hands clean. Simple soap and water go a long way. Getting a green pass from the Pro Density app every time we head to Hopkins, and doing our part to stop the spread by testing, contact tracing, and self-isolation when it's needed. Now, there's a whole lot more to the compact that we can't cover here. So to get a closer look, head to our COVID info site, covidinfo.jhu.edu/compact. JH needs you. Together, let's keep each other safe.
So that's a video we did recently related to all the COVID information that's going on, trying to encourage students to sign and faculty and staff to sign on to social compact, to kind of pledge to do all the important things we need to do to stay safe during the semester. Graphics design, so like you saw a little bit of this before, this is kind of a part of a big public health campaign we're involved in right now to help keep students, faculty, and staff safe this semester. And so we have people who kind of design all these things, and they develop the sets of colors and fonts and everything that we use that makes all of the Hopkins materials look like they're coherent and go well together. Strategic communications. So this was an interesting story. So for a century or so, Johns Hopkins, the guy who founded the university with a bequest in his will back in the 1800s, was thought to have been a Quaker businessman who was staunchly opposed to slavery. But then some researchers at Hopkins discovered over the course of the last year that he in fact had held enslaved people in his house, which was a big surprise. And so this was a really important development in the history of the university that required a lot of careful thought about how to reveal it to our community and to the Baltimore community and to the world. So that was a really difficult example of strategic communications work that we were heavily involved in. And so I think you heard a little bit of this before, how did I get here? So people come into jobs like mine through, a whole bunch of different ways. So there are people like me who used to be journalists. There are people who used to be in politics. There are people who used to be in corporate public relations. There are all sorts of ways you can get here. So, as you heard before, I was at the Baltimore Sun for about 20 years. The last 10 or so of that, I was the editorial page editor, so I was in charge of all of the opinion content. I would say the most important thing that I worked on during that time was a series of editorials after Freddie Gray was killed by police in Baltimore, and there was civic unrest after that. And so we wrote a series of editorials about, sort of why that happened and what the city needed to do to move on from there and to address some of the underlying issues that had been behind the unrest. And so that was, as you heard, that was, my team and I were recognized as Pulitzer Prize finalists that year, which was, a pretty great moment because it was such an important topic that we had been working on. But like I say, people get to jobs like mine in all sorts of different ways. The things that are really important are, excellent writing skills, public speaking and persuasion skills, and where you take it from there is kind of up to you. So that's what I've got for the presentation. Happy to jump in with questions.
That was great. Thank you so much, Andy. We had a lot of questions come in while you were talking, and we did have a few that came in over email over the past few days as people were preparing. Let me look through these. The first one is, looking back on your high school experience, what would you say was something that you wish you had done or given more attention to? I guess that age old, like, do you have any regrets about your high school
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, I'm sure everybody does. I would have, I sort of wish I had done sports in high school. I didn't do any sports in high school. And I think that's an experience that I missed, and would maybe do differently if I had it to do over. I was involved, I did, a lot of extracurriculars, like, I was the editor of the school newspaper, I was in band, I was on the speech team, I was on the, quiz bowl team, all sorts of stuff like that. Did theater, but never did any sports, and sort of wish I had.
And thinking back on that high school, and you mentioned you were working on your school newspaper, did you always know that you wanted a career in communications?
No. So I got interested in newspapers. The way a lot of things happened for me is because my sister, who's a year older than I was, did it first and said I should do it, and so I did. And so I worked on the junior high school newspaper, I worked on the high school newspaper. When I got to college, I sort of thought I would maybe try something else, but then, kind of walked in one day and kind of fell in love with that. But even though I was spending, 60 or 80 hours a week on the newspaper in college at some points, I, still didn't think that was something that it just sort of didn't occur to me that that's something I would want to do for a living. But then, as I was graduating from college, I kind of got to thinking about, like, what really interested and animated me, and that was it. And so I applied for jobs all over the place. My first job was at the paper in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I was there for about 3 years before moving to Baltimore to work at the Sun. And it was just, a really great job to have. There's a lot of freedom in being a reporter. You get to kind of go out and see the world, and kind of make your own judgments about things, and come back and tell other people about it. And so that was a really great thing. And this opportunity came along, and I've found there are a lot of similarities between it and what I did before, but also a lot of new challenges. And so, it's been really exciting.
Okay, great. What advice would you give kids in the current generation, either in high school or college, as they navigate through the immense presence of social media?
Yeah, my advice would be, don't do it. The potential to do something on social media that you'll regret is really high, and so I would be really careful about it. I know it's sort of hard to think that something you put on Instagram or whatever will follow you around for the rest of your life, but it can. And so I would just be really cautious, and to remember that social media is not real life, and that you just shouldn't get too focused on it. I think that there's a lot of danger there.
Okay, good advice. We'll see how we can stick to that.
Yeah.
So what types of, I guess this is a combined question. We had someone ask about what type of people you meet at work, and or who you work with, and I guess also, like, what was their background? What kind of majors did they have in college? What experiences did they have to sort of get to work with you and in your office?
Yeah. So as I said before, there are all kinds of different people and different kind of talents that you need to pull together in an office like this. So there are a lot of people with a writing kind of background, but then also photographers, videographers, designers, web developers. So that they come from all kinds of different backgrounds. So I was an English major in college. I wager there are probably a good number of us working in communications in all different kinds of capacities. But if you come to things from like a computer science kind of background, there are roles for you in this. If you come to something in a arts or graphics design kind of background, there are roles for you in this. I would say, in general that, what you major in college doesn't necessarily determine where you end up. There are always opportunities, so long as you've, really developed your critical thinking skills, developed your communication skills. Those are certainly important in what I do, but they're important in, I think, whatever you do. And, you can always go back to school and get, more specialized training in something if you need to, but that, I don't think you should think because I didn't major in one particular thing that you're necessarily limited for the rest of your life. You can always find ways to pivot into new things and to learn new things.
Right, exactly. I know I was also an English major in college, but had a major in broadcast journalism. But my dean in the School of Communications would always say, communication is a skill, but we need to know what you're going to communicate about. So It was encouraged to take classes outside of just communications in English and writing to learn about the world and learn about history. And so you had actually something interesting to say when you went into the field. So that's very true. So many people I see in communications being from all walks of life.
Yep.
Another question. Have you ever had a situation where you've had to retract something, and how did you sort of handle that situation?
Yeah, well, certainly in the news business, it's inevitable that you make mistakes, and so the important thing to do is basically to own up to them, to recognize it's not the end of the world if you've said or done something wrong. You just need to admit it, to be transparent about it, and to try to do a little bit better next time. I'm trying to think of any particularly difficult examples, but yeah, I would say that it's not like I can't recall a time when there was something I wrote that was just 100% totally wrong, but to get details wrong like that happens. I wouldn't say all the time, but it certainly is an occurrence that you shouldn't be too afraid of. Making a mistake is fine. It's owning up to it that's the important thing.
Right, exactly. In your opinion, what skills are critical for being a good communicator?
Mm-hmm. I would say, clear writing skills are important no matter where you find yourself. Even if you are someone who's, more kind of visually oriented, if you're a graphic designer or a photographer or something like that, you're still going to need to be able to communicate effectively with your coworkers, with, people across the institution, to be, particularly in a place like Hopkins is a really big organization and pretty decentralized. Everybody's kind of off doing their own thing, which is what you want in a university, because you want people, thinking new things and trying new things. But it means that, to get anything done, you really have to be able to reach out to people, to get them to understand what you're trying to do and get them excited about it. So I'd say, good writing and persuading skills are important, kind of no matter what you do in the communications field. And to, I think it would be also very difficult if you were really uncomfortable with public speaking. I think that's a really important thing too. Even if you're not in a role where you're going to be getting up and giving speeches all the time, you will almost invariably find yourself, presenting to groups or, running meetings or things like that. And so developing a level of comfort in that kind of situation, I think, is really important.
Great. So I know things aren't really ordinary or normal, quote unquote, right now, but in a more normal day, what would your day look like for you, and what would be the best part of your job and the worst part?
Yeah. See, I go to a lot of meetings, when I first started this job, I wondered if that's like all I did. So, as I say, there's a lot of collaboration that has to go on in a university environment because there's so many smart people around who all have something to add to what you're doing. And so that's a great thing, but it's also a difficult process to manage. So that can be sometimes a little difficult and frustrating when you're, say, trying to write a message that needs to go out to the university community, and there are literally 15 people sort of editing it on the fly over email and text. That can be really challenging. But on the other hand, you're so lucky to have people who have so much insight and who are so thoughtful and able to contribute. So it's pluses and minuses there. So I would, in these times, I'm kind of on Zoom all day long, as I think a lot of people are, in meetings about all sorts of different things. This morning I was in a meeting about some issues related to our campus security team. Then I was on a meeting right after that about how the university is responding to COVID, and meetings later on in the day about a new program to recruit professors, and it sort of goes on and on. But I think that my favorite parts are probably still the writing and being able to do kind of a really interesting back and forth with smart people who are also dedicated to trying to help the university succeed.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the opportunities that you have to work with Johns Hopkins students, or their opportunities to work with you?
Mm-hmm. It's been a little difficult because for most of the time I have worked here, we've been remote. That I've now worked from home much longer than I've worked in the office. So the opportunities to interact with students are not nearly as great as they would have been otherwise. So I work a lot with some of the student leaders in particular. So the editors of the campus newspaper I talk to pretty frequently. To some extent, in my role as helping in media relations with them, just as I would be with the New York Times or the Baltimore Sun or something like that. And sometimes in trying to help with a little bit of mentorship for them as young journalists, just as someone who's in the business for a long time. I work with, we'll look to, say, student government leaders for advice from time to time about what concerns are among students and what's effective in terms of communicating with them. Like, do they prefer emails? Do they prefer to get their information on social media? Do they like videos? Do they like text? That kind of thing is valuable information. Or sometimes I've even bounced messages off of the student government president to say, hey, does this make sense? Does this, how are people going to react to this? And then we also have a lot of students involved in the COVID response specifically. So there's a student advisory committee that has been meeting for the last 6 or 8 months to help advise the university on the policies and procedures, and should we what kinds of rules make sense, what don't, how's this going to work in practice. And so it's been a really good opportunity to work with them. And also, you saw in the video we had before about the Hopkins Social Compact. So that was something that was developed initially by students and then later involved faculty and staff as well. It's sort of like a pledge that people can sign on to say, like, I'm always going to wear a mask. I'm going to keep 6 feet away from people. I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to, if I have symptoms, I'm going to call and report them, that kind of thing. And so worked with them a lot in terms of, first developing that and then figuring out how to get the word out about it and how to publicize it. So there have been some good occasions like that. I wish it were face to face, but unfortunately that's the world we're in at the moment.
Yeah, I can imagine starting your job and then few months later, just going on
Yeah.
lockdown. So it's been.
Yeah, well, I have one of my chief, like my second in command, actually started in the middle of the pandemic, so she has never actually worked on campus.
Yes, actually, our executive director at CTY started
Yeah.
during the pandemic. So it's been interesting. So there's a couple of questions coming in about being able to separate your own opinions versus the information that you need to share. Has there been any situations, and I can guess what the answer is, but any situations where you've had to present information that you don't necessarily agree with, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, so that's something that obviously came up all the time when I was a reporter, because, you know, as the folks on this call probably know, in most mainstream media, the idea is that you should try to present information in the news as objectively as possible and not, you know, have it just be your opinion. But of course, you know, everybody has opinions about things. Reporters have opinions. It's just a matter of, you know, learning how to kind of to not have them overtake what you're writing or saying. And so I had obviously a lot of experience in that. Then of course for another 10 years after that, I was in the opinion side of journalism, and so got much more freedom to express my opinion. But even there, when you're writing an editorial in a newspaper, it's not necessarily like your personal opinion or voice. It's you know, it's supposed to represent the institutional voice of the paper. And so, like, for example, there were times when we would write an endorsement for somebody for mayor or governor or something like that, and then when I got in the voting booth, I would personally vote for somebody different than I had written an endorsement of. So that kind of thing is not at all new to me. You know, in this particular job, I wouldn't say there have been occasions where I've put something out that I didn't believe or didn't necessarily agree with. It's more a question of, you know, I might have wanted to phrase something differently, or I might wanted to have structured a message differently. But, you know, in the collaborative process, you know, no one person gets 100% say over anything. So that's more, it's more like, you know, there's in this job and in life in general, there's always a lot of back and forth among people who are working together, and you don't, you know, nothing ever comes out to be 100% the way you might have wanted it, but often it works out better that way. You know, the more people who collaborate on something, at least to some extent, the better off you are. So you know, like, I don't get absolute final say over every single thing that I write or put out, but you know, that's pretty normal in life.
Right. We do have someone with a question that is in Texas right now, and they're curious what you think about the public response during the storm and the power crisis right now. Leaders have been criticized for poor communication. How would you recommend that they respond?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the thing that's really disappointing about the situation in Texas is the degree to which politics has gotten in the way of responding. That, you know, people seem to be wanting to make a political point out of this, as opposed to just getting help to people who need it. And of course, it's a real challenge when the infrastructure is damaged as badly as it is, to communicate with people, you know, because people don't have power. They may not be able to watch TV or get on the internet, or the ways that they usually get information. Gathering, the person who asked the question is fortunately not in that position, so I'm happy for him or her. But you know, the most important things in communicating in a situation like that, for, like, say, if you're a leader in the government, is, like, number one, to, you know, show that you understand what people are going through, and that you care, and that you're working really hard to try to fix things. That's number one. And then number two is to just be very clear and honest with people about what the plan is, how long it's going to take, that there are going to be, issues that we don't foresee, but we're going to work hard to get through them, and we're going to keep you updated as we go. The more sort of simple and straightforward information you can give people when they're in a crisis situation like that, the better. I don't think they want to hear you trying to blame somebody else for what's going on. I think they just want to hear, here's how we're trying to fix it.
Exactly. And they don't want to see anyone pointing fingers. Just how are you going to help us, right?
Yeah. But yeah, like the clear and straightforward information is really important for people to understand that there is a plan, that it's being enacted, and what they can expect. That's just the most important thing.
Right, right. We did have a couple of questions come in. I'm thinking about students in high school and college and how frustrating group work can be sometimes, where you feel like the effort is not necessarily even. And another question about just a recent project that you've worked on. So a two-part question. Can you share with us a recent project that you worked on, what it entailed and how long it took? And then when you're working with coworkers that can be difficult and aren't necessarily a positive part of the collaborative process, how do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I'm trying to think projects that I worked on recently. Well, so for example, the one I mentioned during the intro about the discovery that Johns Hopkins, the founder of the university, had held enslaved people in his house. So that, as you can imagine, is a really difficult thing to communicate about, since, number one, it happened a very long time ago, and the information is pretty sparse. There, for whatever reason, basically none of Johns Hopkins papers have survived to the present day, so we don't really have much to go on in terms of, what he was like or what he thought. And the information we had leading us to this was from census records, which tell you something, but not nearly as much as you might like. So we're in a situation where there was more we didn't know than we did. So that's number one. Number two is that obviously news like this is going to be, people are going to react to it in different ways. We anticipated and we found some people felt this very sort of deeply, very viscerally, very emotionally, felt affected by it. Other people sort of thought, well, this happened like 150 years ago, who cares? Then suddenly, there are all kinds of discussions and debates among people about that. And so what we needed to do was to figure out, okay, so what are our goals here? So our goals here are, we want to, get this information out as transparently as possible. We want to be the ones who reveal this to the world, not have somebody else do it for us. We want to reassure the community that we're going to, keep digging into this to try to find the truth, that we're going to, make this a lengthy process of trying to come to terms with this new information. It's not just like, hey, we're sending out a press release and that's it. And that we wanted, very much to have the conversation understand the limitations of what we knew, the complexity of the situation, and to understand, how this changes what we had thought we knew. So that's a lot of complex things that we had to, a lot of complex goals we had. And so we developed a strategy for how to do that, in terms of when we would be communicating, how we would be doing it, what different people would be involved, and then sort of tactically how that plays out. So we'll have a message coming from the university president announcing this news. We had a video that went with it that featured him, featured the researchers who had unearthed this information talking about it, that featured some of the leaders from the Johns Hopkins Hospital talking about it too. We worked with the media, both locally, the Baltimore Sun, and nationally, the New York Times, to kind of give them the story in advance and help them kind of tell this really complex, nuanced story about what we had discovered. we did a lot of research into how other universities have reacted to news like this so that we could, be best prepared to do it in a way that would be, most meaningful to our community. And we, set up new websites to put this information out. We worked with one of the historians involved in this on an op-ed. We did, all sorts of different things. And this was over the course of, I would say, about 3 or so weeks between the end of November and beginning of December, and involved, a lot of different people. So, there are the archivist from the library, there's the historian Martha Jones, who is heading up the research. There's the president's chief speechwriter, who I work with a lot on writing. She's a frequent writing partner of mine. The president himself, his chief of staff, the kind of the top leadership of the university and the health system. So there's a lot of different people involved. Plus, within my team, the videographers and web developers as well, getting into the action. So that was, I don't know if you'd call that a project exactly, but it sort of amounted to that, of a lot of work to try to put together a really kind of important and comprehensive moment for the university.
Yeah, it certainly was something that became a large project, I'm sure, and something where you want to respond quickly, quote unquote quickly, so you're not just sort of sitting on information trying to figure out the best way. So I can understand. Speaking of projects like that and other communication projects you've done, how do you measure the success of your communication?
Oh, could we just get back to the question of, like, if you're stuck on a project with somebody who's not easy to work with, or because I certainly, like, I feel your pain in that question. I understand totally what you're talking about. And I would say that certainly when I was in school, the way I tended to approach that situation is maybe not the most productive one. Like, I think, if I'm being honest with myself, the way I would, when I was a student, approach that is generally just to do it myself, and to not, if the person is not pulling their weight, I would just, kind of work around them. But that's really not, come to find out years later as an adult, that's not a really great way to go about things. In particularly in an environment like in a job where you're going to be collaborating with the same people over and over again, you need to have a conversation with them to say, what you need from every member of the team, and if someone is not providing it, you really do need to have a conversation with them and say, you're not pulling your weight here. You're not contributing in the way that the rest of the team needs. And I realized that in school, that's a really hard conversation to have, because you're not like their boss, so you can't make them do anything. But I think that you do need to kind of get in the habit of having those conversations, even if they're a little bit difficult, because and they may not in a school situation always work. But it's, I think, an important habit and skill to get into for the rest of your life.
Exactly. I think we've all been there. So,
yeah.
So can you tell us how you measure the success of the communications that you send out?
Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of different ways. So we get, obviously, direct feedback from, particularly internal constituencies for if we're doing internal communications, we'll get direct feedback from the faculty and students and staff about things. They're not shy about sending us emails or phone messages or whatever. Externally, we work with a bunch of different companies to monitor how Johns Hopkins is performing in terms of media attention, in terms of social media attention. And so we have kind of consultants we work with who have developed like dashboards for us to see on a day-to-day basis how much, how often Hopkins professors are being quoted in the news, or how often, it's being discussed on Twitter or Facebook or that kind of thing. So there's a lot, in the digital space, there's a lot of science behind it to be able to track day to day or even minute to minute how we're performing in that regard.
One more question, and then I have a final question to ask you. What media outlets do you follow?
Yeah. So obviously, the Baltimore Sun, I'm still a loyal reader. New York Times, Washington Post. I really like Vox and Axios. I listen to, NPR podcasts a lot. I'd say those are sort of major sources for me.
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks, and it's going to date me. I mean, my first job in communications, I worked in radio, and we just had a wall of televisions with every cable news network and local news network and the AP wire, just sort of kind of monitoring everything. So things have definitely changed because it wasn't podcasts and websites. So, but that is really interesting how much it's changed. We're coming up on time, and we just had one last question. Can you recommend or suggest or tell us about maybe a few books that you always have handy for reference, or things that you would recommend that might inspire someone looking into communications, or things that you always use through your workday?
Let's see. So, having an actual dictionary around is always a good idea. You never know. Like I'll find myself occasionally thinking or searching for a word and thinking, is that the right one? And to be able to just flip the page and look and see, I've always found really helpful. The best book, best sort of simplest, concise book on writing I know is Strunk and White, Elements of Style. That's a classic. Always good for really getting yourself into a habit of clear and direct writing. In terms of books that inspire people around communications, that's a hard one. I don't know what I would say about that. I'll have to think about that, and maybe I can come back to it and send an answer. And I don't know what I would say. I mean, honestly, I'm a fiction reader mostly. But.
Yeah, and that style guide, I can't part with it, even though it's been so long since I've worked in communications specifically, but I just can't part with it because it was like a second dictionary for me, just finding all my answers.
Yeah.
So I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to our audience for all the great questions that came in. Please make sure that you visit our CTY Facebook events page, where we're going to be posting more Bright Now Speaker Series events throughout the year. And remember, when we end this webinar, you will be directed to a CTY webpage where the recording will be posted once it's available, maybe early next week. So once again, Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope you can, and I hope everyone can stay warm and safe and enjoy the rest of their day.
Great. Thanks. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.